It is a great day to be alive, and I am so thankful for God, Jesus Christ, who lives in us. Today's video is titled Fed Repo and the Bear Market. I'm going to be sharing 4 new dreams, but before we get started, I'm not a financial advisor. Nothing that I'm sharing is financial advice. I'm simply sharing dreams, visions, and interpretations that I feel God has given me as it relates to crypto. Now, let's get into the video. So I want to pick up where I left off in this particular video. I shared 4 sets of dates that were derived. Those dates all being centered on the wait for the elevator. I explained in that video how the elevator would represent the 3rd candle within this market crash season. In addition to that 3rd candle, I also shared what the 1st and 2nd candle represented as it relates to market crashes that has taken place in the month of October, as well as a noticeable dip in the market that took place on September 22nd. Moving forward in this video, I want to talk about these shared dates, what transpired on these dates, and also include dreams that I had within these dates. So we're going to move in chronological order, talking about actual events. As we're coming up on these dreams, I'm going to give the dream, I'm going to give the interpretation of what I think these dreams mean, and then hopefully in the end make a conclusion as to where we are to go next. I shared that the title of this video was Fed Repo and the Bear Market. And we're going to get started. We're talking about the Fed Repo and the purpose. The purpose of the Fed Repo is to add liquidity into the financial system. Repo equals liquidity in. The Feds are giving cash to the markets. And some key dates that I want to share as to when the Fed released information about what repos took place in the month of October. And I'm looking at the month of October because out of the entire year, it was the month of October when the need for Fed repo became noticeable. Specifically, we're looking at October 15th is when it began. And then October 16th through the 17th was also a date, 2 days, when a Fed repo was needed. So October 15th would be our first date. That will move us down to October 16th through the 17th. These 2 dates combined was a total of $15 billion that went through this repo process. Here I'm simply recognizing a familiar date, October 17th. If you followed my videos for any length of time, you know what this date represents. October 17th is connection to the market crash. I don't think it's coincidence that it has come up here as God is moving me to take a closer look at this Fed repo situation that's taking place right now. So October 16th through the 17th. Next, we're looking at October 29th and 31st. October 29th and 31st are 2 dates that I shared earlier that was derived in that last video. And I want to take a look at October 31st simply because it was the most recent Friday. Not only that, it was the first single day record for Fed repo in the amount of $50 billion. And that is the first single day for 2025. Not only was there a Fed repo, but there was also a reversed Fed repo that took place on the 31st as well. This regular and reverse repo signifies a split. Some institutions needed cash, while others part excess cash with the Fed. This record single day Fed repo that took place on October 31st has been compared to the single day most repo money process in 2020, specifically March 17th, 2020. And we all know what was taking place during 2020 time when this huge bulk of $496 billion worth of Fed repo money was put into the market. Comparing billions to billions, it's obvious that March 17th was the worst out of the 2. However, with much that has been taking place with the Fed rates, October 31st was seen as very alarming because it tells a lot about the liquidity that is currently flowing. So those dates again, on the 15th through the 17th, there was notable activity. On the 29th and 31st, there was a full scale of liquidity pressure that was seen. Here I have a calendar marked in red or highlighted in red are those 5 repo days. What is circled in yellow is that October 17th date that we've talked a lot about. What's circled in gray represents those dates that were derived in the last video, October 26th, 29th, and 31st. Here are the 4 dreams that I will be sharing. Again, we're going to go in chronological order, starting with the day of October 26th, and we're going to go all the way through the 31st. And I will share these dreams as they fall in line. The first dream has to do with a Facebook chat. The second dream has to do with a mower and mortgage. The third dream has to do with a mama bear and a baby bear. And the fourth dream has to do with Reggie Miller. And I believe that all of these dreams are connected to one message, as it also relates to what we've been talking about just now about Fed repos. So we're going to take a look first at October 26th and what took place. Here we see that the stage was set for the upcoming in-person meeting between Donald Trump and China's president. This post states that the U.S. Treasury said that China is ready to make a deal which would remove Trump's 100% tariffs. And we know that that 100% tariffs was tied to October 10th when we saw that historic liquidation that took place because of what was happening between the U.S. and China. It's notable that we bring up that particular flash crash simply because that was represented in my last video as the second candle drop. There were 3 candles altogether. The first one, this one will be the second one, as it relates to this stage being set for the talks between the U.S. and China. And then, of course, the third one will be represented by the elevator. That is the one that we're looking for. So that basically concludes the 26th. This moves us into our first dream. In this dream, I was on Facebook talking to this gospel artist. All I know is that I was aware that we were having conversations on Facebook. After getting off of Facebook, my husband asked me who was Brian Wilson, and I explained to him that he was a gospel singer, mostly known as a child coming up singing with other well-known gospel singers and choirs. And I had this dream on October 27th. After doing my research on Brian Wilson, I found out that his birthday is November the 3rd. This stood out to me because my birthday is November the 2nd. The date that connects to XRP is November the 4th, and his birthday falls in the middle. So for this reason, I'm connecting XRP to this dream. So placing this dream within the chart, I'm looking at, is this dream a hint that news about XRP is coming? Again, his birthday is on the 3rd. That's between my birthday and the date that is connected to XRP, November the 4th. And I'm also wondering if this is connecting to my 2024 dream that I had about the dollar crashing, international banking being the only type of banking, national banking being gone. And in that dream, the first week of November is what I felt like I was shown. Again, that dream was on October 27th. The next dream is mower and mortgage. And in this dream, I saw an individual. He had what looked to be a lawnmower, or I should say a grass cutter. It was a rectangular device that was flat on the ground. There were no wheels. There was a string attached to it. And this individual was pulling this thing over his shoulder. And as he pulled it, I concluded that he was cutting the grass in that way. And for whatever reason, I knew that he was going to be cutting my grass as well. But the strange thing about it was we never had conversation. He only watched me as he walked past me. But in the dream, I had an understanding of what was about to take place. It seemed as if I was getting ready to tell the other person that was with me, when this would take place. And I would begin to give them a date in November. However, the date that I was getting ready to give them, I closed my eyes and changed my mind. And when I opened my eyes, I saw a whiteboard. And on this whiteboard, I saw the date of November 1st being written. And with this date, I knew that it had something to do with mortgage. So lawn cutting, mortgage, an individual using a device that I've never seen before to cut the grass. You drag it across the ground and it would cut the grass for you. And I knew something about the date of November the 1st. So for this dream, we're going to label it as mortgage, November 1st, and a cutting as a question. A cutting of what? A cutting of mortgage, a cutting of banking connected to mortgages. But I'm looking for more clarity on this dream. This November 1st date falls in line, again, with that dream last year about the first week of November. It falls in line with my birthday. A day before, it falls in line with the dates with the gospel singer, his birthday being November the 3rd. So now I'm looking at November the 1st, my birthday November the 2nd, his birthday November the 3rd, and then November the 4th as it connects to XRP. And then getting to our next derived date, October 29th, the meeting between presidents took place. President in China and the U.S. president took place. Also on the 29th, Trump gave directions that the Pentagon begin immediately testing our nuclear weapons. And what I'm about to share next has to do with what I've been sharing in previous videos, talking about the dot-com bubble, the AI being a similar event like the dot-com bubble that could possibly take place, which could affect the markets. I talked about SPY, S&P 500, ETF, the MAX 7, and its ties to Bitcoin. We're going to talk about Bitcoin in a little bit, and we'll see how relevant that is. But as we're looking at AI, what has been taking place on the 28th, before I get to the 29th news, we saw that Amazon cut 14,000 jobs as spending on artificial intelligence accelerates. Another article talks about global firms slash jobs aimed weak sentiments and the push for AI. This brings us to the 29th. On the 29th, we saw or heard about another AWS outage. The first one, I think, happened on October 20th. Again, because this happened on the 29th, I think this is still pointing us in the direction of AI, something happening with AI, something centered around a dot-com bubble type event. And this brings us to our main event on October 29th, the FOMC meeting. Although there were rate cuts, there was also economic uncertainty. And this article states that Federal Reserve cut rates, yet Powell says future reductions are not locked in. And if I'm not mistaken, there was some talk about quantitative tightening ending and quantitative easing beginning. And there were some questions of concerns about why things were happening so quickly and so fast. More about that in a minute. This brings us to our third dream about the mama bear, baby bear, and 7-Up. I had this dream also on October 29th. This dream began with people running away from a bear. We were outside in this open area, and while everyone else was running around, I saw a car. I decided to get into that car. When I did, I began to look for people close to me, those who I can get to come with me to get into the car to stay safe and away from this bear. By the time this part of the dream ended, I had several people in the car with me. Getting into the car and being chased by a mama bear and a baby bear, I think that is symbolic of an automobile crisis. This will be the second time that I've had a dream pertaining to a bear and cars. We've heard quite a bit of news about the auto industry and the crisis that is taking place when it comes to automobile buying. The second part of this bear dream, we were now in a dark warehouse. It was dark, but there were dim red lights throughout. And for whatever reason, it seemed as if this had now turned into a game and people were running from the bear in the dark. Every now and again, I would see the baby bear. I wasn't quite terrified of the baby bear as I was of the mama bear, and therefore I decided to take the stairs up and out of this warehouse. When I did so, I came to a floor where there were a lot of hallways and a lot of doors leading into rooms. So I decided that I would take one of these rooms, I would go in and lock the door. At some point, others began to also come up on this floor where I was, and I opened up the door to let them in with me. The only problem was they began to go in and out. When they thought the bear was gone, they would go outside into the hallway, and when they would hear the bear or see someone attack, I guess they would run back in the room with me. For me, this was too risky and too dangerous, so I decided to let them know either you stay in or you go out. And once they made their decision, I closed and locked the door once again. And for me, I think this is symbolic of people being confused about what type of market that we're in. Are we in a bear market? Are we going into a bear market? And I think it's also symbolic of whenever people see things change or the market go up. And for them, it's a time to get out of that safe place and get back into the market. And then when things begin to, sound and look bad, such as, let's say, news about tariffs, and the markets begin to go down, that's symbolic of people running back into the room, back to a safe place. So again, we're hearing news about tariffs, all the flip-flopping about that. We're hearing news about layoffs, and we're in the midst of a shutdown. We have the market crashing and rebounding. We have jobs reports that says this and inflation that's saying that. We have a FOMC spokesperson who's coming out saying that everything is fine, that our economy is resilient, and they're cutting rates. Yet we have what took place on October 31st, a red flag when it comes down to Fed repo. So the bear part of the stream ended, and I was sitting outside in a lawn chair at some type of outdoor event. I was sitting underneath the lifted hatch portion of this vehicle, and in my hand I remember having a can that either was a 7-Up or it was a Sprite. I'm not sure what it was, but I was drinking it, and I don't remember what it tastes like to say whether it was a Sprite or if it was a 7-Up. But I do remember my husband coming over to me and he said, well, because of your drink, we can now volunteer to help for 7 days instead of 6. Because of your drink, we can now volunteer to help for 7 days instead of 6. And so I agreed that we would help for 7 days instead of 6. And based on this information alone from the dream, I figured that I was drinking a 7-Up because we would volunteer for 7 days instead of 6. So 7-Up. So I figured this is what I was drinking in that dream. Also, hearing in the dream that we would volunteer to help for 7 days instead of 6, to me, I feel like that is significant that we may have 7 more days left in this shutdown, because when you are affected by this shutdown, you are essentially volunteering to work and you're not getting paid. Yes. So we are volunteering to help for 7 days. And again, that 7 days for me represented the 7-Up drink. So I began to do my research as it relates to 7-Up. And this individual, Charles Grigg, he invented the 7-Up drink. And as it relates to the government shutdown in this dream, the 7 days of volunteering, it made me think about Mike Johnson. For whatever reason, these two men favor to me. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I need to clean my glasses. But to me, they favor a lot. And for me, I don't think that that's a coincidence. Doing my research on this 7-Up drink, I found out that it was first sold on October 19th, 1929. Now, when we hear the year 1929, that automatically takes us back to the stock market crash of 1929 that I have talked a whole lot about. So this was not a coincidence that this soda, 7-Up, was first sold within that same month of that same year. To make things even more interesting, when I was doing my research on this drink, it said that it was introduced just 2 weeks before the stock market crash that began the Great Depression. It was introduced 2 weeks before the stock market crash that began the Great Depression. Now, I've often talked about the one day, October 29th, 1929, but here is a list of 3, which I don't think is a coincidence because I've talked about the 3 candles that represents 3 different crashes that would take place throughout the drop of what I saw with that Eiffel Tower dream. So if I was to apply the same thing with the candles here, I would say one candle will go with the October 24th, the second candle will go with October 28th, and then the third candle will go with October 29th to complete that entire drop or crash during that time. But focusing here, again, my focus throughout my whole market crash timeline has been on the date of October 29th, 1929. And as we go a little deeper into when the Great Depression started, this article goes on to say that the start of the Great Depression would have been October 29th, 1929, Black Tuesday. So within the same dream about the mama bear and baby bear, we know the bears represent either a bear market or a crash for me. And moving away from that portion of the bear dream into the 7-Up portion of the dream is going to represent possibly within 7 days, the government shutdown would end. It also represents volunteering your time or your work, which is a representation of the shutdown. That's what a lot of people are doing right now. They're volunteering their time and they're not getting paid. And then the final connection to this 7-Up drink has to do with when it was sold first. And that time frame takes us right to up to 2 weeks before the stock market crash of 1929 and into the Great Depression. And again, I had this dream on October 29th, one of the dates that was derived in the last video. So the question is, should we be looking for something to take place in all the things that we're seeing going on around us today? Is this marking the beginning of a similar event, the 1929 Great Depression? Again, that is a question based on this dream. And if we literally took this article for what it's saying, exactly 2 weeks from the 19th, again, the soda was first sold on the 19th. This is a October calendar for 1929. 2 weeks from the 19th would be November the 2nd, my birthday. But because we know that there were 3 days where this crash took place over the course of 3 days, the 29th was the exact date that it ended on. That's only 10 days. But I thought it was kind of neat going back, looking at that full week to find out that a full 2 weeks from the 19th would have been on my birthday in 1929. So getting back to our chart, as we look at dream number 3, again, this is October 29th, a date that was derived in the last dream. And the questions here are, is this dream symbolic of a bear market, or is it symbolic of just the remainder of this crash, this third candle? Is this also symbolic of the government shutdown ending in 7 days? Or is this symbolic of the bears that we saw representing a crash only and not a bear market? So this takes us to October 31st, the last derived date. On this date, news came out about 17 years ago today. The Bitcoin white papers were published. I thought that was notable because we talked about Bitcoin a lot in its connection to the S&P 500 ETF, the Mag 7, how Bitcoin mirrors the movement, the price movement of Mag 7. And then this brings us back to, again, bank tap Fed standing repo facility in record numbers and month-end pressures. And based on the FOMC meeting that took place on October 29th, the question was asked, is the Fed quietly signaling trouble ahead? Powell injects 2.9 billion into the banking system, biggest repo operation since 2020, as U.S. banks reserve crashed to 2.8 trillion. So this is talking about the bank crash that took place on last week. So a lot is being said here, as this is kind of opening a door to what we were talking about, that elevator drop or that third candle. So again, the overnight repo demand spiked 29.4 billion, the highest daily level in almost 5 years, that 5 years being compared to 2020. And as this person put it, this is not normal in a healthy economy. And this portion of the post takes us back to what Jerome Powell had to say during the Fed meeting. He said that there is no guarantee of further cuts, but that the Fed would stay flexible depending on the data. This sounds cautious. And then finally, on October 31st, that derived date, I had a dream about Reggie Miller. And in this dream, I was watching Reggie Miller shoot. It was almost like looking at different highlights of him in his three-point shooting. And I remember saying that hands down, I felt that Reggie Miller was one of the best shooters in the league. I remember him having his head down as he was running down the court. And it seemed as if he had gray hair, kind of like on top of his head. And so I decided to look up old Reggie Miller to see how old he was. And I saw that he is 60 years old. His birthday didn't seem familiar to me. Nothing centered around this time of the year. But I began to look at his wife, or his first wife's birthday. And her birthday was on November the 2nd. She and I have the same birthday. Again, my birthday is jumping out at me from all of these dreams in some type of way. So this dream about Reggie Miller on the 31st, looking at historical records as far as his three-point shooting. Also on the 31st, we're looking at historical records when it came down to the Fed repo and what took place on Friday, October 31st. Again, historical records. Are we getting ready to move into a historical record of seeing the Fed pump into our markets just as they did in 2020? This time having to do with the economy stability, not anything to do with a sickness. Looking at Reggie Miller's number on his jersey, he is number 31. Number 31, I had a dream about him on October 31st or October 31. And again, this dream was about him in his record high three-point shooting. And I again attached this article that says bank taps Fed standing repo facility in record numbers. So that is what I'm looking at when I think about this dream that I had on the 31st. Looking at his jersey number, the date that I had this dream, this 31st being a derived date, talking about historical numbers and connecting that with the Fed repo. And looking back at the chart again, is this dream symbolic of what we will see later on in the next few days? Record Fed repo numbers, something similar to 2020. Did something take place on November 2nd that we should know about? Something that carried over from October 31st, that Friday? And if something like this was to take place, how would it affect the price of Bitcoin? I don't think that it's a coincidence that the 31st marked 17 years since Bitcoin got started. So all of these things are indicators to me, again, opening that door to us seeing that elevator drop, that third candle. I don't know where God is taking us from here. So this is what I have. Again, as this topic of this Fed repo comes up, I don't think it's a coincidence that October 17th is a date or a day that one of these repos took place in the month of October. And again, across this entire chart, I'm looking at two coins, Bitcoin and XRP. I'm seeing crash indicators. Possible good news with the government shutdown maybe ending in 7 days. The question still stands, are we moving into a bear market, or does the bears in the dream represent just a crash only and not a bear market? Looking at specific topics like the auto crisis, which I need to add under here under the third dream, the auto crisis, because I saw the bear as we were getting to the car running from the bear. And then also with the mortgage and the cutting of the grass, there's just something that's going to take place with the banks that is so significant that it will cause something to happen with mortgage, where mortgage is cut in some kind of way. These are all questions that I am pulling from these dreams, just as we waited for these 3 dates that we can now cross off. I feel that God is revealing a lot, not just through the events that took place on that day, but also with these dreams. That leaves the final date, November 10th. That date was derived from this dream that I had been praying about. Just went back recently to take another look at and to look at it as quickly and simply, I put November over October, and putting it in a math form, I draw the date of 11/10 or November the 10th, October bottom, November top. So the question I will now ask myself about this November 10th date, if this November 10th date is indeed a marking or a starting point where we will see green, the moving up in the market, that would denote that this is not a bear market, just the bears representing a crash is on the way, that third candle. But it also signifies the speed, because if today is the third. If today is the third, that means we have 7 days until we get to November the 10th. That would mean that the market will have to drop extremely fast. This crash will have to take place within the next 7 days. An elevator drop quickly. That is just what I'm thinking right now. Again, guys, take all this back to the Lord in prayer. Right now, I'm just giving you what I feel God is leading me to share. And so that is all that I have for this video. Until the next one, God bless.